A very good evening, everyone. Welcome to the undergraduate webinar series, an interactive online platform connecting high school students to the Ashoka community. In this series, we cover topics related to Ashoka's undergraduate program, where our academic counselors, students, and faculty guide you in understanding the various aspects of the university. Thank you for joining us today for a very important discussion on building an inclusive campus. A university is a space for free learning, living, and expression. To this end, a university then has to be malleable and open to molding and remolding itself in a manner that each member of the community is able to access it, engage with it, and make it their own. Since its inception, Ashoka University has been walking this talk. It adopted and has been actioning a multi-pronged approach towards inclusion. The collective vision, intent, and collaboration of Ashoka's varied, unique, and dedicated offices makes it possible to provide all the appropriate means, resources, services, support, and safety net to its students. My name is Rangoli Dhingra, and I welcome you all once again. Joining me today are a distinguished panel of speakers from various departments at Ashoka University. I welcome our first panelist for today, Marcia Prince, Director, Office of Admissions at Ashoka University. Marcia's academic interests are in the disciplines of literature, religion, philosophy, education, and human behavior. Over the past 17 years, she has worked with high school and university students, as well as young professionals from various socioeconomic backgrounds, cultures, and countries, with a desire to understand and support them within their unique personal contexts. She's been working with Ashoka University since 2013 and leads the Office of Admissions for undergraduate and postgraduate degree programs. Thank you so much for joining us, Marcia. Our next speaker is Reena Gupta, Director, Office of Learning Support at Ashoka University, leading a unique initiative to establish a comprehensive, inclusive education framework supporting students with specific learning needs at the university level. She's driving an entire gamut of activities to expand the scope of disability management in higher education at Ashoka and creating collaboration opportunities with other universities in India and abroad. Reena is also the founder director of Mindsera Learning Solutions, an organization focused on the management of learning disabilities and has worked with various schools and learning centers in India as well as in the US. Reena strongly believes that inclusive education is central to achieving quality education for all learners and developing a more inclusive and cohesive society. A very warm welcome to you, Reena.
Thank you, Rangoli.
I now invite our third speaker for the day, Charul Mendirata, who has recently joined the Center for Studies in Gender and Sexuality at Ashoka University as workshop manager. Charul has completed her master's in liberal studies with a major in anthropology and has also been a student of the Young India Fellowship at Ashoka University. She has completed her bachelor's in social work from Tata Institute of Social Sciences and is trained in community mobilization and development practices. With an understanding of components of both theory and praxis, Charul is interested in understanding the modes of pedagogy which are beyond the classroom setting. Welcome, Charul. Happy to have you amongst us today.
Great to be here, Rangoli. Thank you so much.
Last but not the least, I invite Dr. Arvinder Singh, Director, Ashoka Center for Wellbeing. Dr. Arvinder is a psychotherapist, consultant, and trainer who has worked for over 20 years in the area of leadership, as well as building healing spaces through listening and stories, including in areas of political violence and natural calamities. She's the founder of an initiative called Listening Circles Healing Spaces that builds on this aspect of her work. She is currently Director of Ashoka Center for Wellbeing and guest faculty for the course Effective Leadership Strategies at IIM Ahmedabad, where she teaches mindfulness and empathic leadership. Thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Arvinder.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Without further ado, let's get started. Before we begin, I would request our audience to kindly type any questions they might have in the Q&A box provided on their Zoom screens, and we will definitely address them towards the end of the session. Ashoka University is proud of its inclusive campus, and interestingly, the process begins much before a student arrives on campus. In this regard, reflecting upon the role of the admissions team and the very inclusive admissions process that we recruit, Marcia, if you can just share with us, how has Ashoka University progressed in terms of our admissions and outreach efforts in making sure that we have a diverse campus with respect to geography, gender, and different socioeconomic groups?
Thank you, Rangoli. So I think even before the admissions happens, maybe it's fair to talk about just the kind of outreach that happens at Ashoka. Our outreach team, visits schools, visits various around, different cities, travels, meets with students, families, counselors, and conducts a range of engagements. And if I just had to talk about what happened in the last 1 year, for the class that we just brought in August, given all the outreach efforts, as well as the fact that, students talk to their friends and families talk or look up universities, we have received applications at Ashoka for this program from over 2,000 schools and over 400 cities. So that's a huge number, and it has grown, obviously, over the years. But having said that, reason that we have been doing very extensive outreach, and trying our best to reach out to students from a variety of spaces, whether it's countries or whether it's cities or schools, is because at Ashoka, we really believe in peer learning and peer education. And so to start the conversation around diversity and inclusion, which we are talking about today, it would be right to say that a lot of the learning, while it does happen in the classroom with the professors, most of it, I would say, happens from each other. And so that's why students coming from a variety of places really adds to that. Having said that, just to talk about this cohort, I just want to say maybe this will add some value to what I'm saying, is that in our cohort that we just brought in, we have students from around 15 countries. We have students from 29 Indian states, 107 Indian cities, and this is the cohort that has actually enrolled, and from 425 schools, right? And our gender mix, as you know, we have a growing transgender community at Ashoka. We have more women, almost 58 plus percent women, and over 40% men at Ashoka. And so you can see that the mix is quite well-rounded in that sense, if I can say. So yeah, it's so with that effort of outreach, I would also want to add that the admissions process itself focuses on the selection of students, where we look at each student in their context, from where they're coming, what their background is. And if you look at the application form, you can tell that it's very detailed. It asks a lot of questions about the student, about their views, their thoughts, how do they think, what are some life circumstances that were meaningful to them. And when we say that we do holistic admissions, what we mean really is that we go through every application, in as much detail as possible. We evaluate students with as much detail as possible through our various assessments and the interview, and actually get to know them, which then results in actually crafting a class, which would include students from hopefully many, many spaces and backgrounds and abilities. So I hope that answers.
That does, Marcia, and I personally am very happy to hear whatever you brought out, because this is precisely the message that the outreach team carries right to the schools and the students, and it's heartening to see how many tier 2 cities we've penetrated over the years, and we started penetrating. So this is very, very heartening. And coming from you, I'm sure the listeners are very happy to hear this straight from you. So thank you so much, Marsha. We'll definitely be back with you for some more information. Moving on and talking about how Ashoka University has created a significant benchmark with its policy on inclusion, teaching all types of learners with and without disabilities. So coming to you, Reena, and we know that you're the director at OLS at Ashoka University. So what was the idea behind setting up the Office of Learning Support, and what exactly do we mean by learning support?
Thanks, Rangoli. I think you are going to make me walk the memory lane. So taking you back to 2016, when we started the Office of Learning Support, the idea at that time was very simple. We wanted to promote acceptance and awareness for students with invisible disabilities. So, which we call as specific learning disabilities, such as dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia and all. Because back then, in my experience, when I used to work with students at school level, I realized that, while schools have opened up to the idea of accepting invisible disabilities, the boards, CBSE, ICSE, IB board, they all have, created academic adjustments around it. But there was nothing much happening for these students beyond class 12. So they would get all the help and support only till class 12. And after that, they had nothing. So in fact, that's the reason why some of the parents, even at school level, they were not open to accepting accommodations and support, because their query was valid. Because they would ask that, ma'am, where would they go after school? Because no university in India would accept their learning condition. And my best response to them at that time was that, if you can afford, you can only send them to the US or the UK, right? Because there, all the support system was very well established and was well protected by the law also. Whereas in India, it was more about support for physical disabilities, because those are the visible disabilities. Invisible disabilities, students that would be like a silent struggler. So nobody would acknowledge or understand what it means. So that was the idea behind setting up this office. We wanted to have, a space, a safe space for these students in a higher education space in India, so that students with invisible disabilities could also apply to a university in India, and if they qualify, can enroll and get the right support. So that was the whole idea behind setting up this office. And why learning support? Yes, that's a good question, because like I said, we were planning for invisible disabilities, and the acceptance at at the university level was not much. So to call an office of disability services was something that we did not want, because that would dissuade students from asking for help, because the awareness had to be with the students also, right? Students with disabilities also had to accept that, it is okay to have a learning condition like dyslexia, and it's okay to ask for help. So we kept the name Learning Support. Any kind of an academic challenge any student would face could come to the office and seek help. In last 5 years, we have expanded our work. And today, after 5 years, we have been, I can proudly say that we have been now supporting students for, with all kinds of disabilities. So we have students with visual impairment, physical, locomotor disabilities, hearing impairments, plus the other students who may not have a disability, but would be struggling with some or the other aspect of, academic learning at Ashoka. So now they feel comfortable and open to come and ask for help, because it is not only for disability services, it is a learning support for any kind of an academic challenge. So that makes it easier for the office to, share and tell the world that it's not only for disability, it's for all learners, like you also mentioned. So that's the idea behind the name also.
So fantastic, and that is definitely one huge barrier crossed and successfully crossed, I should say. And moving on, moving on from disabilities, there are of course, other aspects also. And coming now to the CSGS, we know that the CSGS is working round the clock in collaboration with the other centers, deconstructing gender stereotypes and fostering equality on campus. So, Travel, just coming to you now. If you could just shed some light on CSGS exactly. What role does CSGS play in ensuring diversity on campus? And what are some of the initiatives taken up by the center to ensure that the Ashoka campus is a safe space for people from all sections of society?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. So just taking forward, because Reena was also talking about this idea of the safe space, and the safe space therefore can be talked about in many ways. Yeah. But one of the ways which I would like to push us towards or talk about is that to me, a safe space would be a place which would accept who I am, or which would accept who we are. And this idea of who I am, I realize, is always in, in contention, in contestation, in friction, not only with the society, but also a lot of times with the self. So there is always a friction with who I am with myself. And when we're talking about marginalized genders and sexuality, this becomes sort of a foundational understanding of who I am. Uh, and what CSGS then does is to create conversations around the self. And of course, we do it through research. But some of the ways we try to create a safe space is also to foster conversation in groups. And that is what I do through workshops, where these conversations, which might seem highly stigmatized, which might give somebody a sense of, discomfort, somehow becomes also a place where these conversations might be empowering. So by creating and fostering these spaces, we try to create this idea of safe space. And also not just through these workshops, but also we have very robust one-on-ones with students time and again, where this sort of, being in a community where you talk about stigmatized ideas of gender and sexuality, and then you talk to us. And this one-on-one which happens, I think that is how we try to cultivate a safe space. And I think how much ever we try, there are times when students themselves take these initiatives forward, and that's how we see that, okay, something is happening, something when we lose control, students take over. And so these are some of the ways we are trying. Yes.
Which is so wonderful, because this is what I see, not restricted to one office or one department alone, and how all the offices on campus at Ashoka are collaborating actually over, working towards this acceptance and inclusion. So we've now come to Dr. Arvinder, and we would definitely value her inputs on this. Dr. Arvinder, mental health definitely affects how we think, we feel, and we act. It also helps determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and make healthy life choices. So Ashoka Center of Wellbeing strives hard to provide students, faculty, and staff with proper tools on how to manage mental and emotional well-being, thereby creating a supportive campus culture. So if you could just share with us, you get students of all age groups who have to deal with stress on a daily basis. And trust me, none of this has to do only with COVID-19. We talk about stress dealing with stress on a daily basis, whether it is because of academic rigor, peer imbalance, adjusting to a new environment, feeling a sense of belonging or a lack of it, or online learning. So how does ACWB step in to address some of the mental health concerns on the Ashoka campus? And what are some of the preemptive measures taken to look out for signs and symptoms of mental illness?
Rangoli, excellent question. But before we really sort of get there, I'd like to build a little bit of a context of since we are talking about diversity, and how does mental health piece fit in this whole space of diversity? Because it's important to know. We know that everywhere, and more so in our country, the mental health piece goes a little bit ignored, a little bit, and I'm sure all the others will join. I can see Carol and Reena nodding at that. That it's a bit of a space which does not get the kind of attention that it is supposed to get. To my mind, first of all, I think let's just understand that any academic institution, wherever it is, school, higher ed, wherever, I think it's looking at creating or helping individuals be themselves. And education is not only about the academic rigor, but also the emotional robustness of a human being. So I think at Ashoka, all the centers strive to really cater to that part. And I think that's where we see mental health as being at the core of every step of the way. So Marcia shared with how they start looking at people, and I think that's where it starts. They're really looking at how would people fit in, what are the kind of people who need to be given opportunities. And I must really place right there that people, when they come from diverse backgrounds, it's a beautiful melting pot, as we call it at Ashoka, of all sorts of diversity. But we also do know that the reality is that people from diverse backgrounds often face lack of representation, microaggression, some kind of unconscious biases, and many, many stresses. So, so we have a population of students where they're going through the regular stresses of academic, relationship, the stage of life, and the multiple, brain neurons multiplying like how, all of that apart. And of course, struggling with their identity, constantly asking, who am I? I'm not sure, what gender do I place myself in, and so on and so forth. But along with that, when there is this whole element of diversity, knowing not where I come from, feeling like a fish out of water, I think all these things that play out, many a times people are unsure. Is it even happening? And I'm not just talking about India, this is worldwide. Many a times microaggressions go unnoticed. But what they do is they constantly keep chipping on your identity, on your sense of self. So it is important that every academic institution has at the heart of it taking care of the mental and the emotional well-being. Because how do you make good learners if you don't have them in a space where mentally and emotionally they're curious, they want to learn, they have a space where they can just be themselves, where they can talk about anything under the sun. And let me also sort of say, at this point, COVID or not, all of us are on a spectrum on anxiety and stress. We all need some kind of help and support. So I'm not just saying for students, I'm also talking about educators, I'm talking about school leaders, I'm talking about parents, I'm talking about the entire population. We need that space. And that is the reason with which Ashoka Center for Wellbeing was born 5 years back. And and in these 5 years, but what we started was as a space where people could just come and talk. And of course, we realized that none of it is complete unless we educate people on what exactly this is. I mean, you'd be surprised. I mean, the mental health literacy amongst us is very, very low. The way we use words so, so casually is kind of, heartbreaking many times. The way the stigma appears. And of course, we've talked about the invisibility. The mental health is the kind of injury which is invisible. Your physical injury is visible, and people will reach out and want to help you and hold your hand and have some kind of sympathy for you or empathy for you. But with a mental health concern, there is so much stigma, people don't even want to talk about it. So in a way, this part of, the diversity, the issue that comes with this part of diversity is unseen, unacknowledged, unspoken, and I think therefore unattended most of the time. And at Ashoka, we break that barrier. We break that barrier by creating spaces to talk about it, which is why the center is called the Center for Wellbeing. Because it's not only about, if you have a problem, you come here, but we also talk about how to prevent, how to prevent the onset of distress or crisis. We also talk about, how can you sort of be the mental health advocates. We involve students in bringing about this kind of literacy, as we call it. We develop the language of empathy And we do this through various preventive and promotive approaches. And that's where the whole change begins. The kind of problems people have been coming up with have been myriad. It could be anything. And to us, no problem is small. Any problem that actually is hampering your day-to-day functioning is our business. So all the services are confidential and they're free. So any student, any staff, any faculty, any member of the Ashoka community can actually avail of these services by just booking an appointment through a portal. Whatever you share is confidential, of course, with some kind of legal restrictions that we have around confidentiality. But otherwise, we totally sort of believe in the social equity and we work towards it. And I think inclusion is about when we really bring that to the table. So all our offices, whether it's CSDS or OLS or admissions and outreach, they all strive to just bring that, the social equity, which is extremely important and at the core of our work. Sorry, I hope I didn't take too much of your time.
Not at all, not at all. This was indeed very enlightening, Dr. Arvinder. And what really I would take away from this is not the fact that you help treat issues, but you help manage them. And that, I think, is a great step towards, well-being, mental, physical, emotional well-being. So that, I think, for any student is a great thing to look out for. So, which really takes me back to you, Marsha, and, going back to how it really begins. So I also want you to touch upon the socioeconomic diversity here. And, we have a unique need-based financial aid policy at Ashoka. So I want you to share with me, what is the kind of impact of need-based finance at Ashoka, and what is exactly the aim behind it?
So to start with, and I think I have two, three things that I can think of which might add to this. To start with, almost 50% of all the students at Ashoka across programs are on some form of financial aid. And I'm saying financial aid and not scholarship because it's not merit-based. It's based on the ability to pay of the student or their families and their need, really, right? And so I think our motto always has been that if you receive admission at Ashoka, to the best of our ability, we want to ensure that you can study. And money should not be something that hinders you from actually accepting your offer of admission, right? And so, like I said, nearly 50% of our students are on financial aid. And it could be anything as small as, say, 25% on tuition to a full waiver, which includes, residence and meals, right? And so there's a whole range of students. So it's not a small percentage if you look at it that way. And just talking a little bit about socioeconomic diversity, the thing with socioeconomic diversity is when, if you do come from categories where there's low income at home, oftentimes, unfortunately, if you don't get a scholarship, you also tend to go to schools of a certain kind, right? And in those schools, then the learning support that you receive at school is limited to some extent, or you're unable to go for many tuitions that a lot of students, at least in India, avail of, right? And so we have also noticed that at the admission stage, where students who are really bright and actually love to learn and want to explore, definitely students who are thinking, who are curious, who have a great attitude and have a lot of drive, may not necessarily have had the support that they could have done with at the school level. So if I may, I could talk a little bit about an initiative that we started called the Academic Bridge Program, which we kept in mind students like these who are coming from, these sort of complex school backgrounds where they don't receive enough academic support for reading, writing, language, sort of in some sense academic reading and writing, and I don't mean just regular. So while yes, they do are able to learn from the textbooks, there isn't enough support to push them beyond that, so that they're actually able to read to some extent, at least the basic that would be required for university level. And the gap really is very wide between high school and university. So what we started was this bridge program to really bridge that gap. It's a 3-week program Unfortunately, the last couple of years, we've had to run it online, but it's worked out. And it's not run in isolation. It's not like, I mean, while we initiated it and we've put it together, we run very much in support with the Office of Learning Support, the Center for Wellbeing, the Office of Student Affairs, and the main tutors are from the Center for Writing and Communication and the Introduction to Critical Thinking team. So it's an academic program where we also offer other support systems in the early days for 3 weeks prior to the start of the program. And I think given the financial aid, as well as given the bridge program, if you put all of that together, bottom line, it really would be that we are hoping, to empower students to really, as soon as they start university life, to be able to immerse themselves in it and get going from the beginning. A thought that occurred to me was, just because we do diversity, that does not necessarily mean that there is inclusion, right? In many spaces. But I think at Ashoka, what we've been trying to do is, we are so passionate about diversity, but we realize that diversity is really not helpful if there's no plan of action for inclusion. And so we are doing our best together across teams, and we work very closely together, actually. So it's not like we do outreach and admissions and then we don't connect with anybody else. But throughout the entire process, till we hand over the students to campus, right? We work very closely with the various teams to ensure that there is a plan of action for inclusion on campus, so that the diversity that comes in can really feel at home and be empowered, both academically and as well as, of course, non-academically.
So actually, as you speak, Marcia, I realize how guilty we are, at least I am, of using the term diversity and inclusion almost interchangeably. And this is a great point that you brought out, that we do focus a lot on diversity, but I think inclusion seems to be a bigger challenge for all the offices here on campus, easily accessible by all the students. So that really is a wonderful thing, and that I hope that's the message that all our listeners are going to take away today. It's not just about diversity, but also equally, if not more, about inclusion. Which brings me back to you, Reena. And here's, of course, we're getting a lot of audience questions, but we'll surely go back to them. But before that, if I may just ask you some of my questions. So what are some of the initiatives and work done by the OLS that has made an impact in the lives of people inside and outside Ashoka? If you can just shed some light on that, Reena.
Sure, Anjali. So I think to answer this question, I'm going to pick from where Marcia and you left, talking about diversity and inclusion. So, for me, I have an analogy which somehow has clicked with me. I see diversity as a mix of ingredients of a cake. So it's a mix of flour and sugar and chocolate and all those things. So that's a diversity for me. So that's a mix of diversity, and inclusion is how to make that mix work, right? How to make that mix work will give you the entire cake. So, and that is what we all do together, like what Marcia mentioned, all the offices, centers, we come together and we bring all these diverse students together and we work with them, we give them that space and we create inclusion, within the campus. So that's the beautiful cake that we all get. And it's definitely a work in progress. Every year we come with new challenges and we find new solutions to them. Coming to the initiatives that you talked about. So that also has been quite an interesting journey for us. When we started 5 years back, we knew that, on one hand, we will be working individually with the students with invisible disabilities, like I mentioned earlier, and also working with the professors, and putting the accommodations in place for all of them. We also knew that we will have to, eliminate the prejudices also around disabilities, right? So everybody has their own perceptions and opinions about what a disability is, because there are very few people who have actually lived with or have had experiences with disabilities. So the awareness piece was big for us in the beginning itself. So what we did was, while, like I said, we worked with the students and faculty members, we also started, holding workshops and and inviting guest speakers to talk about dyslexia, to talk about autism. So, for example, October is seen as a dyslexia awareness month. So the entire month we would conduct workshops and dyslexia talks with the students on campus. April we would celebrate autism awareness month. So, and students would come together. The student government body would work with us. We would get the volunteers who would conduct these sessions and workshops and have these discussions over the coffee. So in the beginning, we basically conducted awareness campaigns on the campus itself. We also realized that the students with disabilities, and by then we had our physical disability students also on campus. We realized that they also need to be empowered, because it was mostly us, the Office of Learning Support, advocating for these students, because they would not go out and ask for help on their own. So we realized that empowering them is also an important piece of our work. So that's another initiative then we picked up. We started conducting sessions with these students on self-advocacy. And that actually became such a big thing that we had to expand it to the students without disabilities also. So so there were the word went out, and students from different groups, they all came and said, we want to understand how Office of Learning Support can help us also go and talk to the professors, and and advocate for ourselves, ask for some accommodations for ourselves. So so it expanded. Recently we also then started doing initiatives outside Ashoka, where we launched a college readiness program for high school students with disabilities, which was very well received by the parents and students with disabilities in high school. Because we thought that before these students actually come to the university, they have to be made college ready. They have to be made future ready during their high school years itself, or maybe middle school years. So we conducted these sessions, and it was very, like I said, well received by everyone. So that's another initiative that we had with the community outside Ashoka. So yeah.
So, what I really noticed, Reena, on campus, the few visits that I've had on campus, the student body is totally sensitized. There's this comfort level around all sorts of students. So that, I think, apart from all the efforts that you're taking inside and outside Ashoka, this fact that all the students are beautifully sensitized to these different needs, I think that is a great achievement of OLS as well. So it's great. I'm sure you work around a lot of challenges, and it's wonderful to hear about how you overcome these challenges on a day-to-day basis. So that brings me to you, Charul, and I just wanted to ask you, talking about challenges, what are some of the challenges faced by CSGS in dealing with issues pertaining to gender and sexuality on campus?
Yeah, so considering CSGS is a first of its kind center, where we are talking about gender, and there have been centers in the country which have talked about women's studies or something, or even gender studies, but we talk about both gender and sexuality. And this kind of this intersectionality and this spectrum of gender and sexuality, what it does is that we are always sort of in this dilemma, or in this flex, where these ideas of gender and sexuality are reduced to one mainstream narrative. So this is gender, this one thing becomes gender, sexual orientation just becomes sexuality. And this idea of female empowerment becomes feminism, which is fine. That is one way of thinking about it. But then we cannot forget or neglect that there are many understandings of thinking about gender, sexuality, feminisms. And that's what CSGS tries to do, is to expand these conversations and think about the pluralities, the multiplicities, which the scope of these conversations have. So what we try to see is that, okay, feminism exists, but can it exist without religion, caste, class sort of intersections? So it cannot exist in a void. And by talking about these various sort of layers to it, what we do is that we constantly try to talk about multiple histories, multiple identities, and then also multiple bodies. So never restricting to this one idea of, okay, this is what it is. And I think this is precisely what the conversation we are having on diversity too is, that never to restrict this idea of this one body, this one politics, but always to contest it, to think about it more, and to, get out of our bubbles of this one sort of redeeming idea or ideology. Additionally, the other challenge which we constantly face in the kind of world we are living right now, and we claim that CSGS is a pleasure positive center, a sex affirmative center. And what we constantly face is that this sort of, diabolical debate which we see in the country, where at one end there's this conservative politics which try to regulate female sexuality, which says, talk about things like love jihad, which talks about agency which women cannot have. And at the other side, the liberal side of the debate, which talks about rape culture, which says that there is this idea of a binary sort of a consent. So the foundation of all these ideologies then become is that, sex is violent, and there is no other way through which we can look at sex or perceive sex. And then that is very challenging for us to constantly give sex a good name, to talk about the various places, to talk about desire, to talk about fantasy, fetish. And what it means is that when you give sex a good name, you also say that it can be talked about. So the taboo associated with it, and always looking at it with those violent sort of eyes, and always thinking, oh, it's a bad thing, you can't ever talk about it. Once you break that barrier, it becomes something which can be talked about. And then maybe the violence of it can be seen. But we never talk about violence without talking about pleasure first. And therefore, this sort of a dialect gets really, really challenging for CSGS, but we constantly try to break it. Yes.
I think in that sense, maybe it is true then that diversity does give birth to conversation. Conversation leads you to tolerance and acceptance. So it's a thing that we are talking a lot about diversity and inclusion today. So thank you so much, Charul, for sharing that with us. Dr. Arvinder, coming to you, and this is a very pertinent question. How does diversity and mental health go hand in hand? And what has been the impact of ACWB at Ashoka thus far?
Like I sort of touched on earlier, the fact that diversity will have its own set of challenges. So when you put people of many, many, many kinds, many, many, many backgrounds, and differences, when you put them together, just to sort of weave the whole piece together, you need something which takes care of their emotional needs, right? Now, looking at spaces, now it's going to be very difficult. It's like, let me just give you an example. You walk into a room full of strangers, right? And you know nobody, and there's nothing that weaves. Can you imagine what you feel inside yourself? Like you really feel, and you're grappling with your own stories already, what everybody's already talked about. So you come with those stories, you come with the confusion, you come with the fear, you come with excitement, you come with so much more, and you are in a situation where we don't know how we make sense of it. Okay, at one end your dreams have come true, but at the other end this is your biggest nightmare, to be in a space where you don't know how it's going to work. So that's where we need to create a space which actually can address the emotions of people. So that's how, wherever there is diversity, the piece on well-being and mental health has to be there, because it's like looking at that emotional space. Otherwise, just, putting people together doesn't make it happen. Taking, Reena gave a very delicious analogy of a cake. Just by putting the ingredients together, the cake will not get made, right? So there has to be something that, that mixes the ingredient and then also shoves it in the oven for the right amount of time. And that is what the mental health piece is all about. Giving that space to people to be able to acknowledge what they're going through, the fact that they look different, they dress different, they eat different, their language is different, their cultural practices are different, the nuances of the word, the meaning, what you ascribe to it is different. There is so much, So the diversity, unless it has something that unites us, that makes that proverbial cake, it is not going to work. And that's where the piece of mental health works in. And that's where the center addresses. And right from what Marcia, talked about the academic bridge program, I think it started because they noticed in the admissions office space that how, and of course, like all of us, all the offices work very closely together. There was a lot of feedback on what people are going through, and which is why this bridge program, so that people get a little bit of chance to sort of, acclimatize themselves to this really diverse new environment. And a lot goes in that. So the mental health piece is at the center of every bit of diversity that we really consider. So that's how the center and mental health works.
Absolutely. So before we move on to the questions by the audience, there is one question that I feel is really important, and I'd leave it open to all of you because I'm sure all of you would have something to contribute to that. So how do the various departments and offices at Ashoka collaborate to ensure students get the help that they need?
Okay, so I'm going to just sort of say to that, we work in collaboration in a lot of ways. Let me just give you a tiny example. Right from the times of maybe admissions, okay, when people start looking at outreach, for example, this is also a way of all of us really working together to reach out to students, to really let them know what kind of work we do. At another level, the admissions office is also working very closely with all of us in many, many ways. The Office of Learning Support, and we have worked, in terms of referrals as well, right? The center also offers a lot of training, and I know the CSDS avails of our training facilities as well. There is always a referral, like for example, if you see somebody struggling with, issues of gender and sexuality, we would definitely, we refer them on, we write an email. If there is somebody who talks to us about, I really can't manage my time and I can't work with my academic, immediately, we refer them to the Office of Learning Support because we know they are the best at doing that. Similarly, if the Office of Learning Support sees that here is a student who's having a lot of emotional issues, that need to be worked through. So while they are helping them structure their time, they are also referring them to us to say, for the emotional part of what you're going through, go to this center. So there are a lot of very direct linkages, and there are a lot of very, under the surface linkages where all of us work together, right from the step of the student entering into the university to the student leaving, in terms of workshops, in terms of one-on-one interactions, in terms of referrals, in terms of sometimes working together with a student. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of intersectionality on that. And all the offices actually, even in terms of some policies that we may be thinking of, we meet together just to even look at, in terms of academic, right? So we work together even in looking at what kind of issues, what kind of accommodations, what could happen in this. So even though Office of Academic Affairs is not here right now, or Student Affairs is not here, they also work very closely with us. So many a times, we are discussing cases, whether it's, individual or otherwise, on what kind of, without really compromising on the confidentiality, but what kind of help can be given? And what is something that they need to really know when, like OAA, like Office of Academic Affairs, is looking at how do we give an accommodation? They ask us, how does mental health impact? So in a generic way, we are able to tell them, how does the learning difficulty impact? Reena's office tells them about how that happens. So there's a lot of intersection. Four of us are just not enough to really represent how many more offices we have. So it would be unfair to not mention all of them as well. But those are some of the ways that I could think of from the top of my head of how we do it.
That's fantastic.
If I could step in here, actually, because I was just about to talk about the Office of Academic Affairs and the Office of Student Affairs, because we also work very closely with them. But I also want to say that, when we put out the application form right at the start, we do talk a lot about confidentiality, of protecting information of students, which we hold very, close and dear to us as much as possible. But we also do mention that if at any point a need arises, right, where a part of the information or some aspect needs to be discussed, that we reserve the right to do that. So what that does is, at any point on campus over the course of the whole program, could be 3 years down the line, 4 years down the line, right, or immediately after a student joins, if there is something that happens on campus where different teams, whether it's the student affairs or the academic affairs, or say, the learning support or Center for Wellbeing, or any of the other centers as well, if someone feels that they would like to know something very specifically in order to help a student, then oftentimes we are called on, right? Because we were the first point of contact in terms of actually meeting and having those conversations with the students, right? And so what I want to say is that when we are then asked about certain aspects, even at that point, to be really sure to know that whatever information we give is only geared towards supporting the students. And that, of course, is why anybody asks at Ashoka, right? So I think I also just want to make it, kind of put it out there, right? Everything that we have created, our centers, our offices of support, everything that we have created at Ashoka is really just to support students. It's not, I've also worked in universities elsewhere, and oftentimes you see that there is this, students versus admin or administration sort of mentality. And I keep thinking that while that's the, sort of default mode that both parties sort of operate on, I think we must sort of understand that at Ashoka, everything was really created to support students, right? And yes, of course, there are times there would be, some conflicts or some, disagreements, but that's okay, right? And I think one of you just mentioned, I think Rangoli, you did, that conversation, it brings about conversations. So dialogue really is very important, whether it's about religion or about gender, sexuality, or about mental health, or about any sort of, learning support you need or any disability. It's the dialogue. And we've been very open about dialogue from the beginning. Because if you dialogue and you sensitize each other, then, the more you give of yourself, the more other people give of themselves, right? And then at some point you reach some space of understanding. So I think just to sort of reiterate that everything was created to really support students, right? And that's why we collaborate, because we want to come to a solution that is good for the student at the end of the day, and no other reason. So I would say, that would be my sort of view on our collaboration.
So I think it would be safe to say that all the officers, all the centers are working towards a common goal, and that is for the benefit of the student, incoming
Of course.
on campus. And that, I think, by far is the most important thing that the listeners today would take away from this session today. So there is a question that's come up in the amongst student audience questions, and Marcia and Reena, probably you're the best people to shed some light on this. So how does the admissions process facilitate applications from children with learning disabilities, applicants with access to limited resources in particular?
So very quickly, I'll share from my side. So we collaborate very closely with the Office of Learning Support, so with Reena. So when it comes to students with learning disabilities, in the application form, there is a section where we do ask. And sometimes students or families in the past, they were more reserved to sharing information, but more and more people are actually putting information out there because we've tried to say the same thing. It's because we want to support you from the time of the admissions process. So we do ask questions if someone has any sort of a disability, or if they have any mental health concerns, if they would require any extra time, or if they need language support, like English language support. So there are things we ask on the form. And if they indicate any of those, sometimes they will attach their documents from whether it's doctors or therapists or so on and so forth. So we give them extra time. If it's students, for example, who have visual impairment or hearing impairment, we also sometimes find a scribe, or we find whatever help we can, whatever is needed, we discuss with the Office of Learning Support. So from the time of admissions, we make as many concessions for our assessments and our evaluation as possible, should they require it. But we do ask them very specifically. And sometimes if they say that they don't need any assistance, we're okay with that as well. But from our side, we are very detailed about what sort of support they would need. And if it comes to students with, I must tell you, in the past, recently we haven't been able to do it, but students who've had trouble with typing, who haven't had access to computers before, right? And they've come for the assessments and they feel like, oh, we don't know how to do our assessments. So we have actually allowed them to write their assessments on paper. And we have, printed out the questions, made them sit down, give them extra time, the opportunity to actually represent themselves to the best of their ability. And in terms of like the interviews, there are quite a few times we have interviewed in a language other than English as well, if we were able to speak that language and communicate in that. But we've tried our best, I would say. So we do talk to a lot of the parents as well, where we feel that sometimes parents want to talk to us prior to the admissions process, right? So they either speak to Reena or they speak to us, and we collaborate and see what is the best we can do for them. Reena, please feel free to add to this, but I think this is sort of from the admission side.
Thank you so much, Marcia. I think you have spelled out it very well. Just adding to it, Rangoli, the way it works is, so there are some students who reach out to the office directly. They may know about OLS and they have the email ID and my email ID. They would write to us and they would tell us that we have applied and we have this admission test this day. How can we get the support? Immediately, we would just connect with Marcia and the team, and we would make sure that they get all the accommodation that they ask for. So we at the office, we also then meet the students and parents. If of course it's all online, we conduct these meetings, we call them, we talk to them, because we need to understand. See, disability is also not same for everyone. Every dyslexic student is not going to require the same kind of help. Every visually impaired person is not going to ask for just a scribe, right? So different disabilities, different students have their unique needs. So it's important for us to work with them one-on-one, figure out what exactly they would need help with, and then we would just convey it to the admissions team, and they make it happen during their interviews and during the written test. So all that happens. Also, I must mention here that, for the first 2 or 3 rounds where they get the confirmation from the admissions team. So suppose there is a visually impaired person who had asked for a scribe during the admission test. If they get the admission, if they actually accept the offer, that's the time we start working with these students, because we have to train them so that they don't expect a scribe when they join the university for every class, for every course, which actually is impossible. So our goal anyways is to make these students independent. So the technology is the way to go. Many of these school students, who apply to Ashoka, they are of course coming from class 11th and 12th. They are used to the scribes and the readers. They have not been exposed to the benefits of technology. And before they come to Ashoka, what we do is we sit with them, we train them on technology, we give them the list of resources, We work with the parents also so that they can train them while they are at home. So that's the level of support we provide even before they come to Ashoka, right? And of course, once they are with us, then they are us, part of us, and we work with them very closely then.
So this really is a very, very unique opportunity for students to get help from centers even before they actually arrive on campus. And I'm sure the students listening in today, prospective students, are going to take note of this very, very important aspect. There is one question that is actually jumping out at me from the audience questions. And if either of you could just shed some light on this, please. Could you talk about a bit about the religious diversity at Ashoka, and how does Ashoka ensure that students from all communities get an equal opportunity?
So we don't ask for students' religion on the application form because we don't want to make diversity about necessarily about that. However, I can confidently say that because of the way our admissions process is set up, in terms of, because like I said before, it's a holistic process. So we are evaluating students based on every aspect, right, of their engagement, academic, non-academic. Also, we're evaluating them based on our understanding of where they're coming from. So there are very detailed conversations about getting to know them. The personal essays, for example, that we ask for in the application form are spaces provided for students to talk about very significant things in their life, right? And oftentimes we do see that religion plays a very big role there in their answering of our prompts. Actually, it's religion or gender, for example, sexuality. I mean, students are given the opportunity to really talk about what really matters to them, right? And so it comes out. So we're not looking at it as a number in terms of, oh, you know, these many students are from this community or that many from that community. What we're looking of in terms of what are the significant things of their life that's brought them here. And because admissions is, and I'm not using the term merit-based in terms of how we look at merit-based in terms of scores or opportunities, but in terms of how well do they present themselves, which shows that they're suitable for this university, this academic curriculum, and this program. And if we see that they have the potential, and if we see that they will do well, we gladly give them admission, right? So that's why there are no cutoffs, there are no percentages, and there's nothing of that sort, right? But there's a variety of assessments that we do. Having said that, wherever we see that there has been a disadvantage, and it doesn't have to just be a religious minority, right? But wherever there is a disadvantage, including a religious minority disadvantage, we have a question actually in the application form that allows you to talk about any disadvantage that you may have faced. So one is that. And overall, where we see if there is a disadvantage, from in the admissions stage, we have a way where we definitely give some sort of, let's say, equalizer, like we bring them up to some level of, you know, especially when we are either we are reading the application forms, so we're able to say that, okay, this person comes from this place, or these are the things that have happened to them. How can we look at their application differently and not just put it in the larger pool, right? Similarly, when we interview them. So in that sense, those are the sort of accommodations, you can call them, or support that we offer at the stage of admissions, so that at no place they can say that, you know, I wasn't considered just because I came from a certain space and I didn't have those opportunities. So once you go through the application form, really you'll see that we're trying to get to know you as much as possible. And we want students to really tell us about themselves so that we can then do all these accommodations and offer these support systems. If people don't tell us about themselves, it really puts us in a difficult position, because then we're not able to proceed or offer them the support that we actually want to offer. So I think that would be my way of talking about this in a sense that, so whether it's religious or whether it's gender or whether it's socioeconomic or whether it's anything else that it may be, right? We do look at it from a very holistic lens. And I would say that I wouldn't say, it would not be fair to say that we don't look at any of those at all. I think it's the other way around. We look at all of them and then we see what we can do with it.
Of course. I think a large part of who you are, how you've grown up, where you've grown up, all of it comes from these, the questions that are coming up now. And I would say that the students must know that this is where you come to get rid of biases. They're probably coming from, environments where they have grown up with bias, therefore the questions. But this is where tolerance comes in. Dr. Avendra, what would you have to add to that, please?
I think it's important to acknowledge that people come from different contexts, and that context is their story. So I think we cannot really ignore that part. And I think that what Marcia pointed out was very beautifully how we don't see it through one lens, but we see the whole organism. And I think the story of the individual is important. So what story do you have? And it could be through any of the lenses that you're looking at. But for us, the interesting part is what is it that you are presenting? So in that sense, I see that it's not really one or the other, but just what has that made you? And of course, it is going to impact. I mean, we can't wish away, we can't sort of turn our faces from the fact that all these are things that have defined and created who you are today. So we respect that. We don't really look at it at a lens of discrimination or exclusion, but we really look at it as, oh, this is a beautiful part that is contributing to your story. And what Ashoka does is when you come to Ashoka, the 3 years or the 4 years will actually make you ask more questions, add to that story, or give you the power to restory the story. So if you could sort of really extrapolate from that, just see that what we are looking at is who you are. And everything that you bring, whatever it be, your caste, your context, your gender, everything is interesting for us. Everything is meaningful for us. And that's how we look at the human being as a complete package.
Thank you so much,
If I may just add a point to that.
Yes, sure.
Also, as an alum, something which I sort of reckoned post completing the 2 years is that prior to coming to Ashoka, you think Ashoka is a bubble, but then prior to that, you had been in different bubbles. But one of my takeaway from the 2 years was that the number of voices I heard in that 2 years. And when we're talking about diversity here, with people with different genders and religions and sexualities, and I just by interacting on a daily basis with different conversations, I think I changed as a person. This context, which I thought I knew about, suddenly people made me realize that, oh my God, there's so much more to learn. And then diversity then only just not become like a good practice, but something is so intrinsic to being to understand voice. And yes, that was just adding on to that.
Thanks a lot, Charul. That really, you just actually, your sharing of the experience actually put even better words to what I was trying to say on how we look at it, a person as a person, and how then they look and change their stories when they stay. Thanks so much for sharing.
Indeed. Charul, while we are at you, there is a question specifically for you. And this participant wants to know, are there any student-led initiatives that address the gender issues on campus?
Yes, there are many student-led initiatives. So there is the Queer Collective, which talks about issues pertaining to LGBTQ plus identities. There is the Trans Collective, which talks about trans narratives. And also we work in tandem, CSGS works in tandem with these collectives. Additionally, we have these internships rolling out every other month. We have very specific projects and research projects which we have with the students. So I mean, then there are awareness drives and there are volunteering camps. And so like the workshops, which is something I have started doing, was a totally student-led initiative. And now I'm just here to, different students write to me that they want me to do a workshop here or there. And I'm just somebody who exists as a mediator to sort of align with them. It's not an agenda which I drive, but something which students drive, and we work with each other, so to say.
Yeah. So just for everybody else's benefit, I know that CSGS is also conducting workshops, not just within Ashoka, but even in NCR, Delhi, and various schools and universities, as
Yes.
there is a requirement. So thank you so much for your inputs, Charul. Just before we wrap up, a question each for each one of you. So Reena, if you could just share with us, what facilities do you have for students with dyslexia?
Okay, so dyslexia, like I had mentioned earlier, there are, for every kind of a learning condition, there are some general facilities available, and then there are very specific to the student facilities available, right? So a dyslexia student, for example, if anybody struggles with the reading, then we have some assistive technology resources available, which they can take subscriptions from us. And we have subscribed for the special software and special apps that we have. So that would help the students with the reading part of it. Anybody, somebody might have difficulty with writing. A dyslexic student might also have an issue with, putting their thoughts on paper in an organized manner. For that also, we have certain technological resources available with us. We train these students, we work with them one-on-one, and we tell them how to use this particular software and apply it to their daily reading and writing assignments, right? Of course, the general accommodations that we have, like Marcia also mentioned about extra time during their tests and exams, and exemption from marking for spelling errors, whatever. So whatever is required for a student is provided. Provided they have given us a documentation which states and gives us a detailed description of how their dyslexia is affecting their academics. Because then there are times when a student is also not able to figure out what kind of help they would require. Right, so they are only aware of, for example, extra time that they were getting during their school years. But we then tell them that you can also avail this accommodation. So there are several, like I said, general and then very specific to the student accommodations available.
Thank you so much. That should definitely answer this question. And coming back to you, Dr. Arvinder, and I think we're running out of time. So we'll wrap up here with this one last question from you, which says, and I think this is a very, very pertinent question, not many students would be comfortable sharing their mental health issues. So how do you ensure that they find a comfortable and safe environment to be able to talk? And I think that should be stringing it all together, Dr. Arvinder. All the departments have been working towards this, as we said, one common goal. And your answer to this question would wrap this up beautifully.
Sure. So one of the things is, I want to thank the persons who have asked this question, because it takes a lot to even ask something like that, because you just wonder, should I not? So thank you for asking that. The one thing that we do is offer confidentiality. So the moment you know the space is confidential, it gives you the courage to speak about it. Secondly, the center promotes well-being. So we're not only looking at people approaching us only during problem times, but also any time that you wish to, on anything that you wish to. We also run a helpline, which means, to contain, and these are during, transition times or difficult times, exam time, or, we had it last week, just, when people were new, academic bridge program time, we had a helpline, so that if you have something that's troubling you, sometimes just talking to someone for a couple of minutes or maybe more helps you look at it. We also have, spaces where we have, we celebrate like Wellbeing Day. Today we were sort of observing the World Suicide Prevention Day. So if you go on our Instagram, you'll find that the students have created some posts on, talking about how it's okay to talk about suicide and it's okay to feel like that. So a lot of messaging goes around. It's okay to feel sad, low, upset, depressed, lonely, confused, scared. It's okay to feel that. But it's not okay to stay in that. There is help available. And the fact that it's confidential, so whatever you share with us does not go to your faculty or your parent or anyone else. It gives you the courage to come and talk. So whatever problems you may be facing, whether it's to do with, your academics or your identity, or anything else, or relationship, you just come and talk in this confidential space and you find the strength and courage. And mostly we like to tell people that, come for a couple of sessions before you really get to understand what's happening, because something that's been troubling you for so long is not going to go away in a jiffy in one session or 50 minutes or an hour. So give yourself the time and space. There are trained counselors, and of course, because it's not linked to, we are not, bound to give any information anywhere. So that gives people the confidence to come and share. Also, many students, we have these first responders programs and all. There are various trainings going on. So there are lots of levels. The RAs will talk to you, your cohort leaders will talk to you. So they are also trained by us, and they become the bridge between the center and the student many times. So there are levels and levels of talking. You don't necessarily have to talk to a trained counselor. Talk to a trained peer. Talk to someone who's been through it. I mean, look at Charul's sharing. Must have made it so much more real for all of you than what all of us are trying to say. So I think that in crux is, helping students to sort of unburden, talk, and make sure that, you have an exciting and a fulfilling stay at the show.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arvinder. And I know I did say that would be the last question, but this is one that's come up more than once. And Moshe, this one's for you, and I promise this is the last one. Are there any concessions in the admissions process for students with any kind of physical or learning disabilities?
Yes, it would really just depend on what they would need, because like, all of us have been saying, each one's concerns are different, right? And so whether it's learning disability, whether it's a physical disability, wherever they have indicated on the form, and we encourage everyone to indicate. And going forward, the forms are now closed, but on October 4th, the forms will go live for the upcoming cycle for next year's intake admissions, for next year's admission. But you will see on the form that there are avenues for you to really talk about what sort of support you need. And if you fill that up, we will do our best from our side. And if we feel that we need to speak with you, we will speak with you as well, to understand more prior to, the actual assessments of the admissions process. But otherwise, it's quite, if it's evident and it's very clear what it is, then we will definitely, make those concessions. So we give like extra time, or we offer like any other support, like a scribe if needed. So just depending on what support that they really need.
Thank you so much, Moshe. I think we need to wrap up now. Much as I am enjoying going on and on with all of you, my privilege that I'm moderating this session today. So thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I hope you all enjoyed being part of our discussion on building an inclusive campus. Before we wrap up the session, we would really appreciate it if you could take a minute to share your valuable feedback with us. The link to the feedback form is provided in the chat box. We would also like to invite you for the next webinar, Learn to Unlearn, which is scheduled for Friday, 24th September from 6 to 7 p.m. The registration link for this is provided in the chat box as well. I also take this opportunity to invite you for next in the series of the scientifically speaking lectures, Faster, Higher, Stronger, Physics at the Olympic Games, coming up on Tuesday, 14 September at 6 p.m. The registration link for this is also provided in the chat box. Please note that the recording of today's session will be available on Ashoka University's YouTube channel in case you would like to share it with your friends. If you have any further queries regarding various other aspects of the university, please feel free to write into us at apply@ashoka.edu.in. Please note that round 1 applications to the undergraduate program will open on 4th October 2021. Once again, I thank all our panelists for taking out the time to participate in this discussion and share with us their unique journeys. This brings us to the end of this session. Please take care and stay safe. See you all next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.